I set up a charity a year or so ago that stands against female genital mutilation, FGM. It's called 28 Too Many, and the reason for that is there's 28 countries across Africa that still cut their girls. So my idea is to take a Christian stance against this practice for the practice to end, which would affect 3 million girls a year and enable them to have their medical and psychological freedom. I'd been working as a HR consultant, run my own business for a few years after working in corporate life. I started volunteering with an aid agency called MEDAIR, who work in Christian relief work. I was working out with them capacity building their team, so teaching management and leadership. And one day I was in a clinic out in West Darfur in the war in 2005, and a little girl was introduced to me, an 11-year-old girl. I was told her story through translation, that at 5 years old she'd been cut, she'd had FGM. I couldn't get this story out of my heart. A few years later, bit more learning later, a bit more experience, I decided that perhaps a bit like Esther, maybe God had called me for a time such as this, and this was my challenge to do something. I think we are called not to a cosy existence. We're in a fallen society. Satan is around and champing at the bit, and there is much suffering on our world. I think we can't have the love of Jesus and the love of God without actually getting involved in suffering. Mission is about suffering. We have to have the balance between, through suffering, showing that healing and restoration is possible. One without the other doesn't make sense. I mean, I think in Christ we've got the perfect example of somebody who got involved and suffered hugely, and also got involved with the people who were suffering, the woman who was bleeding for life, the Samaritan women. Jesus was a great example to us all about working in the margins.
The estate I'm on is in the bottom 2% of deprivation, which is something that I didn't even believe existed. I've seen poverty that is painful to see. So I know families around the corner from me. In fact, there's a family around the corner from me that lives in a house where the back door doesn't close, the toilet doesn't flush, the roof is falling in, and kind of actually recently the benefits have been cut and they don't have enough money to eat, basically. And that is a very real experience where basically the services have failed and they've fallen through the net. If you grow up on this estate, you are considered vulnerable or at risk. And so we see young people from the age of about 8 or 9 getting involved in drug taking and alcohol. From about the age slightly older, about 10 or 11, they're involved in sexual activity, and they're open to stealing and being used by the older young people as just runners for criminal activity. And all of that, you know, combined with not engaging with school, is just basically seeing young people's lives wasted, just going down the drain on things that they don't need to be because of the environment they grow up in. And that's suffering in a different sense. So that's not young people that seem miserable or upset or in pain, but actually this is suffering in an entirely, maybe even worse sense of, you know, we're watching lives ruined and they don't need to be. Living there gives a whole different dimension. So we're part of the community, we're part of the Residents Association, which means that we're part of the local neighbourhoods, and we're known by parents, and the young people knock on our door if they want us. So they come around and say, can we have a chat about this? Or more likely they come around and say, can we have a drink? We're freezing cold. And so we give them a hot chocolate and chat about the week. So we've done a few projects, things like we made a Christmas card for Christmas, and we took a few on some trips like go-karting. We're very much about living alongside the young people we work with. So getting alongside them and just trying to find God within that place.
I think it's difficult to not be overwhelmed in this society where we are bombarded with media issues all the time, and sometimes people just want to zone out and indulge in other things like consumerism, just a cushion from the horrors of society. I think my view would be get a balance, know your own self, know what you can take. I sometimes find that watching the TV news can be almost like a drug. I can find myself sitting there an hour later still watching horror after horror. So I often listen to the radio instead of watching the news because it's less visual and it doesn't imprint some of the traumatic images into my head. And it allows me more space to contemplate them and pray about them and think what to do. I also think as Christians we're not called to everything, we're called to something, and it's a case of finding one's own calling. Bringing up children or working in secular life is just as much of a calling as what I'm doing. Mine just seems to be a little bit more colourful and exotic. So I think it's find your calling and then follow that, and then you don't have to be bombarded by other things, you have focus, and when you have focus you're more likely to actually execute something and make a transformational change.
I think it's about small steps. I think, I can't change the entire world on my own, but I can change the world around me, and I can do small things that impact those around me, those in need that I see. And I actually think that's what Jesus did. He did change the entire world, but actually he did it one person at a time.
I've seen 2 girls whose health has been transformed by my interfering and my interventions, and those 2 girls are cured now. So even if I do nothing else, that's something I'm pleased I've done in my life.
This week we had a whole bunch of chocolates left over from Christmas. We took them out and said, right, Christmas is gone, we're throwing all our Christmas trees away, so have these as a sign so that we put our Christmas trees away. But when we put our Christmas trees away, we make New Year's resolutions, so what might yours be? And 3 of them told us they want to get back into mainstream education. 1 told me he wanted to give up weed. Another one said, look, I want to get back into school, I've been out for 7 months, will you help me write a letter? So we're seeing young people take control over what they want to do and making steps to do that.